How true to your story when your market forces you to change everything? If you're like me and my guest today, you probably have felt a shift in the market in 2025. On this episode of Strategy Talks, I sit down with Haley Walden to dig into how the most resilient creators pivot not just what they sell, but how they talk about themselves, right? The market is changing, and if you're in need of a business pivot, this is the Strategy Talks for you. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Morin-van.
Hello, everybody. This is the second to last episode of 2025. I am so excited that you're here with us and that you're here to learn about business pivots and what's going on. So, before I introduce you to my guest, I want to welcome all of you who are with us live, whether you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. And for those of you who listen to Strategy Talks as a podcast, welcome to you as well. So I'm going to bring onto the stage, for those of you who are listening, so you know, my friend Haley Walden. How are you today, Haley?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. So we're going to talk about navigating market shifts and business pivots. What a year 2025 has been, for us marketers. Are we happy that it's almost 2026?
I'm ready.
I know, me too. So, as I said in the intro, this is the second to last episode. I'm just doing a very quick plug. Next week, I'm going to be live solo for the first time on Strategy Talks at the end of 4 years. Yes, I'm going to have my first solo episode. I'm putting it out here, and I'll be live and I'll be talking about the state of marketing and what I expect to happen and to see in 2026. So if you're listening and watching to this episode this week, make sure you tune in next week and join me live and ask me all kinds of questions. And I'm looking forward to that. So, Haley, you work with a lot of service-based entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, creatives, authors who often need to evolve how they position themselves as markets shift. From your experience, when someone realizes the current niche is no longer working, what's the first internal shift they need to make before any rebranding or pivot strategy can be successful?
So I think the most important internal shift is to remember that you are not the service you provide. So you really have to go back to the core of who you are, because beyond whatever that offer is that you've been selling, you have a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and experience to draw on. So really, I feel like it really has to do with coming back to who you are and really getting grounded in that before you rush into a pivot that may or may not work because you're reacting rather than responding strategically.
Ooh, that's a great answer. You and I were talking in the green room about that, right? And one of the things that I shared is for years, I've been an organics social media specialist and I've been a social media strategist. And I've pivoted in the last year or so to position myself more as a content strategist because I do way more than social media. I get pulled into email marketing campaigns and live stream shows and podcasts. And, yes, it's still organic social, but it's way more than just the social media content. It's all of the content, right? That lives on the website and that lives in emails. And so I've pivoted in that regard myself. So I love that answer that you just gave, Haley. That is great. So you've spoken about balancing client work and personal creativity. So let's talk about your own creativity. You're an author, you're a martial arts I don't know what kind of martial arts. Tell us about that. Let's do that before I say something that's not true. You're doing a lot of creative things. So let's talk about that. And then let's talk about how that helps you pivot when you need to and how it helps you help your clients.
Yeah. Okay. So, as far as the author side of things, I write epic fantasy novels. So it's another business that I've been building out, and it's also a creative outlet for me, which is awesome. Just drawing on a lot of childhood nostalgia and love of pop culture and those kind of things. And then I've also been a martial artist since I was 14. I train in Tang Soo Do. I've also done some Taekwondo, Qigong, a little bit of Tai Chi, a little bit of Jiu-Jitsu. But my right now my preferred art is Tang Soo Do, and it's a Korean martial art very similar to Taekwondo. I'm a second degree black belt in that art.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. So when we talk about using that creativity to help clients, right? How do you decide which part of the creativity to lean into? Because we're just talking about how marketers, let's say it out loud. A lot of marketers have been laid off. A lot of companies are shrinking, marketing departments with the rise of AI. We've seen a huge shift in what kind of jobs are available. And it doesn't mean there are no marketing jobs available. The jobs will look different. We have to lean into that. So when we talk about being a creative, you're a creative writer. I do a lot of video. I do a lot of writing. Both of us are creators. So how do we use that and use that to shift when we need to?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways that I draw on creativity. I'll pull in the martial arts reference first, and then I'll bounce out to creativity. For martial arts, a lot of times, if the market's uncertain, if things are happening unpredictably in business, which is fairly normal in certain seasons, it helps me to kind of tune back into the internal discipline that you cultivate through your martial arts practice. And it can be really easy to get unplugged from that when you're in the middle of a difficult season in business or otherwise. So I like to pull in the mindset that I've cultivated through that practice and apply that to things that I perceive as obstacles. If I stay rooted in that, and oddly enough, it might sound counterintuitive, but if I actually go and train, if I'm really feeling mentally blocked, it can help me to move my body. So you don't have to go be a martial artist to apply that principle, but if you find some kind of physical embodiment practice, even if it means like take your shoes off and walk in the grass outside, if you get back down into your body, that makes a difference too in the way that you show up. And then with the creative aspect, so for me as a creative writer, I have transferable skills that I can pull from for writing fiction. And it can be really easy to compartmentalize and silo, like creative over here, business over here. But when you're talking about, the work that I do as a content strategist, as a copywriter, obviously, as an editor, but you pull all those, you pull on emotional threads in all of those scenarios with, and, that's one of the things that I've really built out through creative writing is to be able to write scenes and settings that are emotionally resonant for the reader. You feel immersed in those things. So you could take that skill and apply it to content strategy. Suddenly you're thinking about the target audience of the client, and you're okay, what connects with the target audience? What do they want from this exchange with your brand? What do they need? How does that need to make them feel? What's going to make them, pull the trigger metaphorically to do business with you on an emotional level? The same thing with copywriting. What words, what language do you need to use that's going to create that emotional environment for the buyer to be more willing to engage, right? And so it's so easy to think about business as this sterilized thing, this other entity that's way over here and not connected to creativity. But really, there's, I think of it as a transferable skill. And you just think about, okay, like what thread do I pull on from this part of my life? And how can I apply that to this current, issue or obstacle or, whatever. But that's how I look at bridging.
No, I think that's great. And again, we were talking in the green room and you was just sharing how you've updated your own website. So you've used some of that creativity as you make your own business pivot in this marketing shift and what you offer. And that's one way to be creative, right? To, work on your own content. Us marketers, we sometimes forget to do that. And this is, I was just reading something by Joe Pelusi, who was a keynote speaker. I think he might've been the closing keynote at the B2B forum in Boston in Handley's conference. And he shared on LinkedIn. I wasn't able to go this year, but I shared on LinkedIn that, in the next 10 years, all of us are going to change the way we communicate because of, glasses, and everything that we own is going to communicate with each other. So whether you have a phone and glasses and your car and your home, and everything is going to talk together, and your whatever content you want, it's going to be at your fingertips. So in order to get ready for that, to be found, the one thing that we have, and as marketers, we have a leg up because we know how to do this as content strategists, you and I have, 3 legs up, is to create our own content. He was like, start a podcast, start a blog. If you're not doing this already, you need to start now. And so I think the message, if you're watching this and you're a marketer, you're a business owner, if you're posting content, but you're not creating content, and I think there is a distinction there, I think that you need to start doing that and start working with somebody like Haley to figure out, what am I creating that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years is still going to be part of my business. When somebody, walks from their home to their car or is talking into their glasses and they have a question about your business, will you show up? That's the work we need to do now and in 2026. So I love that and that creative piece goes right hand in hand with that, right? We can use that for ourselves and for our clients as well. So when we talk about helping clients reposition, like, there might be industry experts, influencers, visionary. Is there any changes in market or client behavior that signal to you that their voice or positioning needs to evolve, right? So somebody might come, and this is an example, and say, I'm an expert in food. We were just talking about food. You and I love having that connection. But really what they're an expert in is food prep, or maybe they're really an expert in gut knowledge, or maybe they're an expert in exercise. They want to be food, but they're not. How do you navigate and how do you steer that conversation? How do you figure out what really they are an expert in?
Yeah. So in that situation, it's like trying to cast a really wide net. Because if you say, well, I'm an expert in food, maybe you're an expert in holistic wellness with a special focus in gluten-free or paleo eating or specialty foods or something like that. So you start to narrow down based on what is your special interest, what do clients and prospects ask for, even people in your everyday life. What kind of questions do you find yourself answering over and over again? And what area do you feel the most drawn to? Because that's a segment of people that you need to be speaking to. If you are showing up and casting such a wide net that nobody knows what to recommend you for, or who you help or what you specialize in, it's actually going to be harder to capture the people who need your help. And so I think that a lot of us go through this. I know that I've gone through the fear of creating a niche for myself. And I think that the same thing holds true for a lot of business owners. If you try to generalize what you do, you're hoping that you're going to capture more people. And the fear behind the niche is, well, if I specialize, right, then I'm going to have competition because it's a smaller market. But the thing is, your unique voice is going to resonate with people differently. So it doesn't matter if there are 100 other food specialists who, concentrate on paleo, for instance. You're the only version of you. So there's people who are going to want to hear what you have to say that they may not receive those things from other experts in the industry. And there can be a lot of different reasons for that. It could be your presentation, your voice, your energy. They just like you, it's a lot of different things, but it's very, knowing who you are and then not being afraid to amplify that and say what you need to say to the people who need you specifically. That's a lot of what we find ourselves having to do. And sometimes that audience shifts if the market shifts or if behaviors change.
Yeah. And let's bring AI into this conversation right here, because now think about that. Somebody, very few people, they might say on a Google search, what food should I eat if I have this autoimmune disease, right? But in AI, people are going to be way more specific about how they speak to AI, and they're going to go much deeper. So you want to be ready for those kind of queries, right? If you're a business owner and you've answered very basic, maybe frequently asked questions in content, you should niche down and dig a little bit deeper and answer very specific questions, because that's how people are asking the questions now in, say, a ChatGPT or a Gemini. So practicing with those tools, going in AI and seeing how you prompt is also going to be a great indicator for you on what kind of content you should be creating, and work with a content strategist on what's the plan, right? We're not just creating content for tomorrow. If you're doing that, guys, then you're just posting, right? We're creating content for, a long term. We want long form content that is valuable to your ideal audience for the long term. Right now on my blog, the most watched and read articles on my blog are some that I wrote 6 years ago. Right? They're still valid. They have had a lot of juice behind it, a lot of eyeballs. Google knows it's good content and keeps sending people there. So what you're building now is going to bring people later. So really think about that, and then think about what AI, how people ask questions to an AI and answer them that way. Be deeper about that. And Haley, how do you use AI when you work with a client on talking about market shifts and business pivots? Do you pull in data? Do you pull in voices? How do you use AI when you work with a client, or do you not?
I'm not a heavy AI user with clients at this time. With a little bit of experimenting with client permission, I have looked at points of emotional resonance for an audience to help me really ideate and think through what angles I wanted to take with the copy. I'm not a fan of letting AI draft for me. I'm such a picky writer, and I find that it loses a lot of nuance, and I just end up rewriting everything. So for me, I have used it to help me with some ideation on the front end of the process of really, okay, so I've got this audience segment and this is what I want. This is the result that I want. This is the action I want them to take. What are some emotional drivers that would help this audience? And for me, instinctively, I oftentimes already have in mind what kinds of answers I want. I just want more options and more variations on the answer that I may not have thought of. And so it really helps me with kind of broadening the scope of what the triggers could be for the buyer or the customer. But yeah, I'm starting to play with it a little bit on the strategic end, just to really kind of juice up my thinking around how to draft something if I'm writing. And again, the way that I operate with AI is not necessarily inherent in my business. It's more if I've had a discussion with the client and they want to incorporate it, then I'm happy to see if there's a way that we can use it to help create maybe an expedited process in certain parts, or more efficiency where that's possible.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, so how do you draw on some of these seemingly non-business elements, right? That you're doing to inform your approach when clients are facing a rapid pivot? For example, when their market collapse. Say that's a catastrophic, like, I mean, some of us are seeing that in marketing. Market collapses, there's no work. I'm thinking project management's going to be out there for a while, but maybe social media management, I don't think it's collapsed yet, but there are pieces of the marketing process that are going to just be automated. Let's be real. So if you have a client in a certain industry, and their market collapses, not just shifts, how do we work, how do we help them figure out how to pivot that business? And is that something that are you set up for as a strategist, as a content strategist? Are you having that conversation with them? Is somebody like that in a panic? Are they like, let's talk about that, because I've got some thoughts on that myself, on how to approach that, but I would love to know how you would do that, because I think a lot of us are facing that, where some parts of our businesses are irrelevant at this point.
Yeah, and I haven't really had that conversation. So with the clients that I've worked with, the bigger collapses have been around organic reach in the last few years, and a quick, you know, pivot as far as like strategy goes, or they're, they're cutting the budget because organic reach has dropped. And I think that goes, I wanted to touch on something in a moment on that goes back to your conversation around AI search, and, what's coming up for people, when they prompt, when they ask questions to AI, that sort of thing. But what I'm noticing more is, shifts that people need to make based on what's happening with the tech and what's happening with Google. If a client's market completely collapsed, I think the way to triage that, and I'm thinking from a solopreneur maybe perspective rather than corporate. I don't want to speak to a large organization um, answering this theoretically, but for somebody who's running a solo business, I would probably try to bring them back to, what are the transferable skills, and what's the value, and what are some adjacent skill sets that you've built, or, maybe even going back to something that you did in the past that you have experience with. It really depends on what the business is. Are there new offers that you can develop for the market as it stands right now? Can you lean into tech? I've seen a lot of copywriters who embraced AI and started learning how to be prompt engineers, and then started teaching people how to use AI for their copywriting, for instance. I've seen others, because copywriting was a market that's been, deeply affected by AI. I've seen other writers niche down and go in highly specialized direction in order to keep getting clients as writers. Um, but really, it all kind of comes back to, what's your skill set? What's your area of interest? Is there a quick pivot that you can make, embracing a tech, or going back to something you used to offer that you don't now? Um, for me, it's, I've been on a pivoting journey into more strategy, but I've actually doubled down on, finding copywriting um, clients in times that things seem slower, as I'm trying to build up the strategic offers. And so I like to have a broad skill set, and I encourage people to do that, is to try to stay in touch with the different areas where you work really well, and then, draw on those as much as you can and
Yeah,
stay open minded.
That was great. That was actually going to be my last question. Like, as you are pivoted, I have pivoted. I shared that, I'm doing the same work. I've just relabeled it as a broader, which is funny because we're talking about niching down, but social media strategist and organic social media is so niche, and people probably didn't quite understand it. So content strategist, yes, they get, but I'm still hands on as well. And so that pivot, I think, makes a lot of sense for people. And I love that you brought up copywriters. I've seen the same thing. They've become AI prompt engineers, and some of them are selling courses and they're teaching AI. And a lot of us have needed to make these shifts. My question to you is, there's a lot of people out there watching and listening. If you made it this far and you're still listening to Haley and I, maybe like Haley and I, at times in 2025, you felt alone. Maybe you felt ignored. Maybe you've lost a job in marketing. What is some advice that we can leave people with that are in this navigation period, that might feel alone, might feel a little bit of desperation, might think, I've heard so many people say, I'm getting out of marketing. What can we say to them, Haley? What do you and I have to offer to somebody who feels that way? Because I think there's quite a few of us out there who are, struggling with, getting new clients, or having lost a job and not being able to find a job, or needing to make that pivot. Let's talk to the marketers out there. Do we have any encouragement? What can we share with them that can move them forward after listening to this?
Yeah, this dovetails into what I was thinking about saying about you were talking about specificity in prompting, right? And when we think about that, when it comes to our expertise, so we want to get out there and talk about what we know, talk about what we've experienced. And when you're in distress and you're in the middle of a pivot, you're trying to figure out how to find the next clients or the next projects, it can be difficult to get into that creative flow. But more and more, it's becoming important to show up as an expert. And this is the same for brands. I've seen quite a few conversations around this, and I agree and can add to it. But the idea of having subject matter experts in your brand offering their expertise, their perspective, we can't play the game that we played a few years ago with SEO, where brands essentially piggybacked off of competitors and everything was about what's the mix of keywords that you can rank for. It's not that SEO doesn't work anymore. It does. However, now what the search engines want is real expertise. So we've been inundated with AI and tech, but AI does not have your lived experience. It doesn't have your work experience. It doesn't have the combination of lived experience and expertise that you have. And so starting to get out there, don't be a chameleon. That's one of the things, that I did in my business that was a mistake for the first, 9 or so years, just blending into other people's brands. And it's a great talent if you are able to bring in somebody, go into a brand, pick up their brand voice, seamlessly fit in there, but you become commoditized and you still don't stand out as yourself in your own right. So I really think that this is the time to start building your own content if you don't have content yet. And you have to sort of experiment a little bit, and that can be frustrating because when we're in this energy, we want to know what's going to work, right? And if you're a service provider, you know how it feels like to be on the receiving end of that when you have a negotiation with a potential client and they say, what's the ROI going to look like? What can you tell me? How is this going to work for me? How is this investment going to work? And, also as a marketer, and if you're a content marketer, you've probably been in this conversation quite a lot where you have to say, well, I can't guarantee specific results. We can apply the strategy and then we can look at what works and then we can double down on what works. but all of this takes time. So for us also, it's going to take time to figure out what resonates with people, but we have to carve out the time to create our own content and to stand on our own 2 feet, because as the market shifts, the people who stand out are the ones who have put themselves out there consistently. And if we're not doing that, it's going to be really easy for the tidal wave just to sweep you under, and you're going to get dragged out with the undertow, and it's going to be harder to fight your way back to the surface. So yeah, I would just say, get really clear on who you are and lean into that, and really start to think about, what you can talk about. If you're not sure what you want to talk about, open a blank document or open your voice notes. You don't have to write. You can talk. Have a conversation with a colleague. Anything that you can record or document in some way where you're really getting into a flow of conversation and talking about what you know. You've got to capture those moments intentionally and turn those things into content, and then just keep showing up and figure out what works and experiment with platforms, and then just double down. But have your real estate, have an email list that you own or a Substack subscriber list that you own. Don't bank on social media to be your only audience platform, just in case, and go from there.
That's fantastic advice. And I've heard several experts say this, especially in Q4 of 2025, personal branding, do your own content, no matter how busy you are, start a podcast, start a YouTube channel, write a blog, do something, Substack, do something that is yours. And I would add to that, Haley, the only thing I would add is make sure it's long form content. Because if you do long form content, which is a blog or a longer video or a podcast, you can break that into many pieces and then you can spread it everywhere. And so start at the top with a piece of long form content. If it's once a month, do it once a month. If you can do it bi-weekly, do that. If it's every week, like I do with this show, then you've got plenty of content to dole out everywhere. But own that piece and share your expertise. I love that. So let's end with that. That is great advice. If you've stayed to the end, we really appreciate you being with us today. Haley, how can people connect with you, and where can they find you? Where are you most active?
Yeah. So I am over at HaleyWalden.com. That's where you can find out about the business and offerings and all that good stuff. And then my handle on social media is I am Haley Walden. And right now I've become pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm trying to keep that up, and I post pretty regularly on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Haley. And thank you so much for those of you who stayed all the way to the end of this video. Appreciate you. Don't forget, I'll be back next week with the last episode of 2025. It will be a solo episode where Doreen will just keep talking. It'll be very interesting. I would love for you to tune into that. Thank you so much for watching and listening, all of you. I'll be back next week with another episode of Strategy Talks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.